Welcome back to the Chattable podcast, where we learn real English in real life and have fun and be proud.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, absolutely. Today, we are opening up a rather fascinating document. It's simply titled Food 3.
Right, Food 3.
And it unpacks the unexpected historical and psychological backstories of 3 incredibly common food-related phrases that we use in everyday English.
It really is a massive topic.
It is. We have a lot of ground to cover today, spanning ancient religious rituals, the theatrical stages of the English Renaissance, and even the voting mechanisms of early democracies.
And for those of you listening, the core utility of this episode extends well beyond just vocabulary acquisition.
Oh, definitely.
By dissecting the history and the pragmatic nuances of these specific phrases, we're essentially looking at a cross-section of human psychology. We will be examining the social dynamics, the inherent power struggles, and the cognitive frameworks that are completely baked into the colloquialisms you rely on every single day to navigate your social world.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. So I want to jump straight into the first phrase detailed in our source document, which is butter someone up.
Right, a very common one.
Very common. The text defines the core meaning of this idiom as being overly nice or flattering to another person, specifically to extract a favor or to maintain a favorable position in their eyes.
Which is, it's fascinating because the document points out that this behavior is inherently a bit manipulative.
It does say that, though it also categorizes it as an everyday common way of operating. But I have to say, I'm slightly hesitant to universally label it as manipulation.
Why is that?
Well, manipulation implies a malicious intent to deceive, whereas buttering someone up often feels like an implicitly understood social contract.
I think your hesitation is warranted from a purely ethical standpoint, but linguistically and psychologically, it certainly qualifies as manipulation.
Okay, fair enough.
Albeit a benign pro-social variety, we should look at this through the lens of pragmatics, specifically politeness theory.
Okay, let's unpack this. Politeness theory.
Yeah, so when you ask someone for a favor, you are committing what linguists call a face-threatening act.
A face-threatening act.
Because you're imposing on them.
Exactly. You are imposing on their autonomy. So to mitigate that threat, you apply a social lubricant. The text calls it a common way of operating because human beings are hypersensitive to social hierarchy.
Right. We all know when we are doing the buttering.
We do.
Yeah.
And we generally recognize when it's being done to us. Yet it functions as a highly normalized, almost expected strategy to acknowledge a power imbalance without making the interaction overly transactional or awkward.
That distinction regarding the face-threatening act is a really compelling framework. It explains why there's such a sharp dividing line between a genuine compliment and buttering someone up.
Oh, there's a huge difference.
Yeah, because a genuine compliment is theoretically given freely, with zero expectation of a return on investment.
Right, there's no hidden agenda.
But buttering someone up, however, is deeply transactional. It's an investment of social capital meant to yield a specific dividend. Precisely. And the document provides a few contexts where this is most prevalent, singling out workplace politics and the classic domestic scenario of a teenager trying to borrow the car from their parents.
Oh, the classic car scenario.
If we isolate those two specific scenarios, the underlying variable in both is a strict asymmetry of resources.
Because the parent controls the transportation.
And the child requires it. The child lacks the leverage to demand the car, and an unadorned request carries a high probability of rejection.
They can't just say, give me the keys.
Right. Therefore, the child deploys strategic flattery to alter the parent's emotional state prior to the request. It's a calculated softening of the target.
And we see the exact same architecture in corporate politics, don't we?
We absolutely do. The manager controls capital, promotions, raises, scheduling. And the employee attempts to navigate that disparity by artificially inflating the manager's ego. It's a defense mechanism against powerlessness.
The text actually provides a very illustrative example of this corporate dynamic. The sentence provided is, everybody is trying to butter up the CEO, Marcus, so that they won't be laid off in the next few months.
That elevates the stakes considerably.
It really does. We aren't talking about a teenager trying to secure a vehicle for a Friday night anymore. We are talking about economic survival.
Right, their livelihood.
But I question whether the strategy is actually effective in a scenario that severe. If everybody is transparently flattering the CEO during a period of layoffs, doesn't the sheer volume of the flattery render it useless?
It's a fair critique of the strategy's efficacy, but it ignores the fundamental anxiety driving the behavior.
How so?
Well, in an environment facing imminent layoffs, the structural integrity of the workplace is fracturing. Employees are operating under acute psychological threat. In that context, strategic compliments become an almost instinctual reflex.
Like a survival mechanism.
Exactly. The employees flattering Marcus aren't operating under the delusion that he is suddenly infallible. They're participating in a desperately competitive game of game theory. They are attempting to manufacture an artificial shield of goodwill.
Hoping that when the axe falls, it doesn't fall on them.
The hope is that when the CEO must execute the purely quantitative task of reducing headcount, a subconscious emotional bias will favor the employee who consistently validated his authority. It's an attempt to turn a cold economic decision into a warm relational one.
Wow. Which brings us to the actual origin of the phrase, which the source material places in a highly unexpected location.
Ancient India.
Yes. We use butter someone up in modern corporate offices, but the text reveals this traces back to ancient India. It describes a tradition of throwing actual balls of butter at statues of deities to ask for good luck or a specific favor.
It's quite the image.
I have to admit, when I first read that, I was skeptical of the direct lineage. Throwing dairy at a stone carving feels like a massive leap from complimenting an executive's tie.
The lineage is definitely complex, and we should be careful not to view it as a simple linear evolution without acknowledging the mechanisms of cultural and linguistic translation.
Right.
However, the conceptual mapping is incredibly sound. In ancient Vedic traditions, clarified butter, or ghee, was an enormously valuable, high-calorie resource. It was a purifying substance.
So there wasn't just a casual offering.
Not at all. Offering it to a deity, often by pouring or placing it upon a representation of the god, was a profound physical act of devotion. You have an ancient individual standing before the ultimate manifestation of asymmetric power.
The divine.
The divine. And they're offering a literal, valuable resource to appease that power and request a favorable outcome.
So you're arguing that the physical act of smoothing over a literal statue with a valuable lipid is conceptually identical to smoothing over an ego with valuable words.
It's conceptually identical.
I can see the structural parallel. The text specifically highlights the idea of smoothing things over. The ancient worshiper sacrifices physical resources to smooth their relationship with the divine, and the modern employee sacrifices a bit of their own pride or sincerity to smooth their relationship with management.
Precisely. And we have to consider the cognitive linguistics at play here, specifically how the human brain utilizes sensory experiences to understand abstract concepts.
Like the physical properties of butter.
Exactly. Consider what butter does. It melts. It coats. It dramatically reduces friction. It transforms dry, unpalatable foods into something rich and easily swallowed.
Right. It makes everything go down easier.
When an individual is preparing to make a demanding request, they are introducing social friction into the interaction. The request is the dry, difficult-to-swallow sustenance.
Oh, like that.
By applying the complement, the metaphorical butter, they are chemically altering the social interaction. They are coating the awkwardness in something sweet, reducing the interpersonal friction, and making the underlying demand much more palatable for the recipient.
It's a fascinating application of embodied cognition.
Yep.
You were suggesting that our brains literally cannot conceptualize the abstract idea of mitigating social awkwardness without tethering it to the physical reality of a slippery, rich fat.
That's exactly what the language implies.
I want you, the listener, to keep that framework in mind during your next staff meeting. When you observe a colleague excessively praising a supervisor's mediocre presentation right before requesting an extension on a deadline, you are essentially witnessing the ghostly echo of an ancient ritual.
You really are.
The impulse to appease a greater power with something sweet hasn't changed in thousands of years. We've merely substituted verbal praise for clarified butter.
The mechanics of appeasement remain entirely intact, yes. We've stripped away the spiritual resonance and the physical expenditure of resources, reducing a profound act of divine petition down to a commonplace, slightly cynical corporate tactic.
A very common corporate tactic.
But the architectural blueprint of the interaction, recognizing a power deficit and attempting to bridge it with an offering that reduces friction, is a fundamental constant of human behavior.
Let's transition from the smooth, friction-reducing properties of butter to a phrase that embodies the exact opposite sensation. The second idiom detailed in our source document is being in a pickle.
A very evocative phrase.
Very. The text defines this as being stuck in a difficult, messy, or uncomfortable situation. But what really stands out in the provided material is the strict boundary it places on the usage of this phrase.
You're referring to the scale of the calamity, which the source is quite dogmatic about.
Yes.
It explicitly dictates that this phrase should only be used for moderate, annoying problems. It draws a very hard line, noting that you would never describe a true tragedy like your house burning down as being in a pickle.
Right. It reserves the phrase for losing your keys, forgetting a significant birthday, or completely mismanaging your schedule.
The mid-level inconveniences.
But I have to ask, why do we dedicate highly specific, evocative culinary metaphors exclusively to mid-level inconveniences? We have words for disaster and we have words for minor hiccups, but in a pickle occupies this very specific buzzing frequency of moderate anxiety.
I'd suggest it's because those moderate, annoying problems, what psychologists might term micro-stressors or daily hassles, actually constitute the vast majority of our psychological burden.
That makes sense.
An acute tragedy, like the house fire mentioned in the text, triggers a profound macro-level survival response. The sympathetic nervous system engages completely. You are dealing with literal life and death.
You're not worried about idioms in a house fire.
Exactly. But misplacing your keys when you are already late for a crucial meeting, that doesn't trigger a life or death response, but it triggers a highly irritating, claustrophobic spike in cortisol.
Oh, that panic. We've all felt it.
It induces feelings of foolishness, incompetence, and social embarrassment. We require a linguistic tool that acknowledges the genuine discomfort of that state without inappropriately elevating it to the status of a trauma.
And in a pickle serves that exact function.
It communicates. I am currently trapped in a stressful matrix of my own making, but my actual survival is not at stake.
That perfectly aligns with the illustrative example the text provides. It introduces us to a hypothetical scenario. Julian is in a bit of a pickle. He double-booked himself for 12p meters with 2 different clients.
Poor Julian.
We have all experienced a variation of Julian's dilemma. It's a purely logistical failure, but the emotional weight of it in a professional context is surprisingly heavy.
Let's analyze the exact nature of Julian's anxiety. He has manufactured a scenario where he cannot possibly satisfy his obligations. He cannot physically occupy 2 spaces simultaneously.
It's physically impossible.
If he abruptly cancels on client A, he breaches professional etiquette and risks his reputation. If he attempts to somehow juggle both, he appears disorganized and disrespectful.
He is trapped in a paradox of obligation.
The situation is objectively low stakes in the grand scheme of human suffering, but subjectively, for Julian at 11:55 a.m., it feels intensely claustrophobic.
And I think that claustrophobia is what makes the phrase so incredibly apt. Calling it a pickle subtly downplays the severity of Julian's incompetence while perfectly capturing the flavor of his embarrassment.
It's a contained mess.
He will eventually have to make an uncomfortable phone call, offer a profuse apology, and perhaps suffer a slight ding to his professional image, but his life will continue. Which makes the historical origin of the phrase, provided in the text, all the more interesting.
It's a great visual.
The source asks us to visualize the literal reality of a pickle. Vegetables sitting in a sour, salty, vinegary mess.
It's a highly evocative, highly sensory description.
And surprisingly, the document traces the literary popularization of this phrase back to William Shakespeare.
Of all people.
Right. Specifically identifying its use in his play The Tempest. Now, I know Shakespeare is credited with coining or popularizing hundreds of idioms, but applying 17th century food preservation techniques to abstract human frustration feels particularly inventive.
It is inventive, though we should clarify the context of its use in The Tempest. When the character Trinculo uses the phrase, he is primarily referring to being heavily intoxicated. He has been preserved in alcohol, essentially.
Oh, that's interesting. So it started as a joke about being drunk.
However, the semantic shift from being drunk to being stuck in a difficult situation is a fascinating journey of cognitive mapping. If we look at the sensory parallels the text provides, the metaphor is remarkably robust.
Let's break down those parallels because the text explicitly compares the human experience of being in a pickle to the physical state of the vegetable. You take a cucumber, you remove it from its natural environment, and you force it into a highly restricted, airtight glass jar.
A very small space.
You then submerge it entirely in a harsh, biting solution of vinegar, salt, and various spices. It is subjected to an anaerobic environment where it is fundamentally altered by the sourness surrounding it.
Now map that physical process onto Julian's psychological state. Julian is the cucumber.
Julian is the cucumber.
Wow. The double booking is the glass jar. It is a rigid, inescapable boundary he has placed around himself.
And what's the vinegar?
The sudden realization that he must disappoint a client is the introduction of the vinegar. The impending professional embarrassment is the salt.
Wow.
He is metaphorically stewing in this highly acidic, uncomfortable social environment. He cannot easily extract himself, and the longer he remains trapped in the dilemma, the more the stress alters his emotional state.
That's a brilliant way to conceptualize it. For you listening, try to recall the last time you found yourself metaphorically submerged in that vinegary mess. Perhaps you hit reply all on an email containing sensitive, perhaps unflattering information.
The worst feeling.
Or maybe you confidently promised to deliver a project by Friday, only to realize on Thursday night that you fundamentally misunderstood the assignment. Think about the physical sensation of that realization, that tight, sinking feeling in your chest.
That's the lid going on.
That is the feeling of the metaphorical lid being screwed onto the jar. You are trapped in a sour environment of your own creation, waiting for the situation to ultimately resolve itself.
And returning to your earlier point about why we use this specific phrasing, I would argue that deploying the idiom in a pickle acts as a psychological pressure release valve.
Oh, a release valve.
By verbally categorizing your stressful situation using a slightly absurd food-based metaphor, you are signaling to yourself and to others that while the situation is highly frustrating, it lacks genuine lethality.
You're not going to die, you're just pickled.
Exactly. It introduces a microscopic element of humor into the frustration, which helps regulate the nervous system's response to the microstressor.
It's a way of saying, I am deeply annoyed, but I maintain enough perspective to compare my plight to a preserved cucumber.
Exactly.
I like that. Let's move on to the third and final phrase, detail in our source document, which shifts our focus from being trapped to the exact opposite, the sudden unintended release of something hidden.
Spill the beans.
The phrase is spill the beans. The text defines this as telling a secret or revealing information before the appropriate time.
The document makes a very specific note regarding the sociolinguistic context of this idiom, stating that it is a very casual conversational phrase.
Right.
This is a vital distinction. The lexicon we use to describe the revelation of hidden information changes drastically depending on the stakes.
Sure.
You might declassify government documents, or a witness might testify to hidden crimes, or a whistleblower might leak corporate malfeasance. But you do not spill the beans to a grand jury.
No, you definitely don't. The text grounds the phrase in highly specific low-stakes social interactions. Gossiping with friends, trying to guess the contents of a surprise gift, or attempting to extract the details of a dramatic workplace meeting from a colleague.
Everyday office stuff.
These are scenarios primarily driven by curiosity, rather than justice or national security.
I would argue they are driven by the mechanics of social currency.
Social currency.
In casual human relationships, asymmetrical information, knowing something that others do not, acts as a form of temporary social wealth. It grants the holder a momentary elevation in status and interest.
That is so true. Everyone leans in when you have a secret.
When an individual demands that a friend spill the beans, they are effectively demanding a redistribution of that social wealth. They are asking to be brought into the inner circle of knowledge.
Gossip as currency.
Gossip, from an evolutionary sociology perspective, isn't just idle chatter. It's a primary mechanism for social bonding and establishing group norms. Sharing a secret is a way of demonstrating trust and solidifying an alliance.
Let's examine the illustrative quote provided in the text because it perfectly captures that dynamic. The quote is, Elena must have told you something really funny. Spill the beans.
A very standard interaction.
I don't necessarily view this simply as a demand for wealth redistribution. It feels more like a conversational crowbar.
The crowbar.
Yeah, the speaker observes a physical reaction, a laugh, a smirk, and deduces the existence of hidden data. The phrase, spill the beans, is then deployed as a playful yet forceful mandate to breach confidentiality.
It functions as a conversational crowbar, certainly, but I think it relies heavily on the assumed intimacy of the relationship to work.
Because you wouldn't say it to a stranger?
It's an imperative command, spill the beans, but it's softened by the colloquial nature of the idiom. If the speaker said, disclose the contents of your conversation with Elena immediately, the interaction becomes hostile and interrogatory.
It sounds like a police interrogation.
By using the idiom, the speaker frames the demand as a game. It implies, our social bond is strong enough that you shouldn't withhold this amusing information from me. It leverages the relationship to force the release of the data.
The visual imagery of the phrase is also incredibly dynamic. It's not a slow leak, it's a sudden kinetic event. And that brings us to the historical origin provided in the text, which takes us significantly further back than Shakespeare's preserved vegetables.
Way further back.
According to the document, the roots of this phrase lie in the democratic processes of ancient Greece.
This is undoubtedly the most structurally complex historical connection in the entire document, and it requires a bit of unpacking regarding how early democratic systems functioned.
The text outlines a specific voting mechanism. It states that citizens in ancient Greece would vote on secret matters by depositing beans into a receptacle, usually a jar or a helmet.
A helmet, literally a soldier's helmet.
The system utilized a binary color code. A white bean signified an affirmative vote, or a yes, while a black bean signified a negative vote, or a no.
We need to contextualize the gravity of this act. We aren't talking about casually electing a student council president. The citizens participating in these votes, whether in the assembly, the boule, which was the council, or serving on vast juries, they were making profound civic decisions.
They were running the state.
They were determining foreign policy, enacting laws, and frequently deciding the literal life or death of their peers through mechanisms like ostracism or criminal trials. The secrecy of the ballot was the absolute bedrock of the system's integrity.
Because if it wasn't secret, there would be consequences.
It protected voters from coercion, bribery, or retaliation by powerful individuals. The physical mechanism for this immense civic responsibility was staggeringly simple: a handful of dried legumes and a bronze helmet or clay urn.
But the text zeroes in on the vulnerability of that simple physical mechanism. It explains the mechanism of the metaphor. If someone accidentally knocked the jar or the helmet over, they would literally spill the beans.
Literally.
The secret vote was immediately and irreversibly ruined, as the tally of white and black beans was suddenly visible to everyone before the official count.
I want to focus on the physics of that moment because it perfectly maps onto the modern concept of revealing a secret. You have a rigid, opaque container. Inside that container are discrete, individual units of highly sensitive data, the beans.
The data.
As long as the container remains upright, the information state is secure and unknown. But the system is vulnerable to physical entropy. A momentary lapse in coordination, a bumped table, a clumsy elbow, and gravity asserts control.
The helmet tips.
The vessel tips. In a fraction of a second, you transition from a state of total secrecy to a state of total exposure.
And crucially, it's a state of irreversible exposure. Once the beans are scattered across the stone floor, completely mixing the white and black votes in plain sight, the integrity of the process is fundamentally compromised.
You can't undo it.
You cannot simply scoop the beans back into the helmet and pretend the data hasn't been perceived. You cannot unspill the beans. The visual perfectly encapsulates the tragedy of a ruined secret. Once the words leave your mouth, once the information is in the air, you cannot force the listener to unhear it.
That concept of irreversibility is central to the metaphor's enduring power. However, if we synthesize the ancient origin with the modern usage described in the text, we have to acknowledge a massive depreciation in the stakes involved.
A huge drop in stakes.
In ancient Athens, spilling the beans was a civic catastrophe. It compromised a democratic mechanism designed to protect the state. It could result in a mistrial or the failure of a critical policy vote. It was a serious breach of protocol.
Right, whereas today, if you spill the beans, the most likely consequence is that someone finds out they're getting an espresso machine for their birthday a week early.
Exactly.
Or, as we discussed earlier, it simply accelerates the spread of office gossip regarding who is dating whom in the marketing department. We have taken a phrase born in the crucible of early democracy and repurposed it for the lowest stakes of social chatter.
The stakes have certainly plummeted, but I would argue that this highlights a profound truth about how language evolves.
Tell me more about that.
The societal context and the consequences of the action have shifted dramatically over 2.5 millennia, but the underlying conceptual architecture remains flawlessly intact. The human mind still processes the premature revelation of hidden truth through the exact same physical metaphor.
So the brain doesn't care if it's a state secret or a birthday party.
Whether it involves dried legumes clattering onto a marble floor to ruin a trial, or an accidental text message ruining a surprise party, the structural narrative is identical. A secure container was breached, discrete units of hidden information were scattered, and the resulting exposure is permanent. The stakes changed, but the physics of the metaphor did not.
That brings us to a really interesting point of synthesis for this entire episode. We've spent this time rigorously analyzing buttering someone up, being in a pickle, and spilling the beans. We've looked at them in isolation, but what happens when we view them as a collective? Aside from the obvious fact that they all involve food, What does this specific trio of phrases teach us about the mechanics of the English language, or human cognition more broadly?
I think the most significant takeaway is a deeper appreciation for conceptual metaphor theory, which we touched upon earlier.
The idea that we map physical things onto abstract things.
Yes, human beings are tasked with navigating incredibly abstract, invisible landscapes. We must manage complex social hierarchies, we must negotiate overlapping logistical obligations, and we must navigate the complex economy of truth and secrecy. These are highly abstract problems. You cannot physically touch a schedule conflict or hold a secret in your hand.
And because we cannot touch them, our brains struggle to process them purely in the abstract.
Precisely. Our cognitive architecture evolved to interact with the physical, tangible world. Therefore, to understand and communicate abstract social concepts, we instinctively map them onto physical objects and processes that we understand intuitively. And what is more universally, intuitively understood across all human cultures than the properties of food?
Food is universal.
We all understand how food behaves. We understand the textures, the preservation methods, and the containers we use to store it.
So we basically hijack our neurological understanding of the pantry to explain our psychological distress.
That's a great way to put it.
We borrow the physical property of butter, its ability to melt and reduce friction, to explain the abstract strategy of mitigating a power imbalance through flattery. We borrow the physical reality of a pickle, a vegetable permanently altered by being trapped in a sour, acidic environment, to articulate the claustrophobia of a self-made logistical disaster. And we borrow the physical vulnerability of beans in a jar, contained units of matter that can be instantly scattered by gravity, to conceptualize the irreversible damage of a leaked secret.
It's an incredibly efficient linguistic system. By anchoring our abstract anxieties to tangible, universal experiences of food, we ensure that our emotional states are immediately legible to others. When you tell someone you're in a pickle, you don't need to explain the neurochemistry of your stress. The metaphor does the heavy lifting for you.
And the historical journey this document has taken us on to prove that point is genuinely staggering. Think about the temporal and geographic mileage we've just covered in this episode. We began in the ancient Vedic period of India, analyzing the socio-religious implications of devotees sacrificing valuable, clarified butter to secure divine favor.
A massive jump in time and space.
We then pivoted to the classical era, standing in the assembly of ancient Athens to witness the literal mechanics of democratic voting through the depositing of legumes into bronze helmets.
From there, we leaped forward to 17th century England, observing how a playwright like Shakespeare could observe the mundane chemical process of anaerobic fermentation in a pickle barrel and extract a lasting metaphor for human folly and entanglement.
And finally, we arrived in the mundane reality of the modern corporate office, watching our hypothetical Julian sweat over his double-booked calendar and observing an entire department nervously flatter their CEO to survive an impending round of layoffs. It is a massive timeline, entirely connected by the casual, seemingly throwaway idioms we use without a second thought every single day.
It serves as a powerful reminder that language is far more than just a utilitarian tool for exchanging information. It is an active, living archive of human experience. Every time you utilize one of these idioms, you are unconsciously participating in a chain of transmission that stretches back thousands of years. You are carrying forward the religious rituals, the civic accidents, and the literary inventions of countless ancestors. You are exhaling history with every casual conversation.
Exhaling history. I think that is the perfect phrase to summarize the scope of what we've unpacked today. It completely recontextualizes the mundane language we use at the grocery store or the water cooler.
And with that in mind, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We've spent this episode dissecting how ancient religious rituals, early democratic voting mechanisms, and Renaissance food preservation techniques have become stealthily encoded into our modern idioms.
The hidden history.
This prompts a rather fascinating speculative question. What highly specific actions are we performing today that will become the confusing, disconnected idioms of the future? What modern digital technologies or contemporary corporate rituals are we engaging in right now that people 500 years in the future will use as colorful metaphors long after the original context has been completely forgotten?
That is a brilliant question. Will citizens in the 26th century tell someone who is confused that they're stuck in the cloud? Will they describe rejecting a bad idea as swiping left centuries after smartphones have ceased to exist? It really highlights how the mundane actions of today are the linguistic fossils of tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. We hope you never look at butter, pickles, or beans the exact same way again. Keep examining the words you use, keep unpacking the hidden histories in your vocabulary, and always stay curious. We will catch you next time.